Betsy and Thomas here for the American Intelligence Media. Oh, Thomas, I am so excited. This is our first on-location event.
This is huge, Bets.
I know, it's very huge. And we drove all the way. We have a very special guest. And we're not going to show you his face yet, but the camera crews arrive tomorrow and we'll be showing his face. And you'll also get the big reveal of who Thomas Paine really is. But right now, we have some breaking news that we want to talk about. And we have an expert in the house. So Thomas, take it away and I'll get out of the picture.
I think we should name this talk Zuckerberg the Fake, because we are today, right now, with the man who owns Leader Technology, the group that actually created, I don't know what you call it, Michael McKibben, you call it the source code or whatever. You created the invention, the trade secrets that really were used not only by fake Zuckerberg, but a whole list of people who had to have this new technology. So tonight, as we're sitting having a pre-conversation, I started making so much fun of Zuckerberg that Betsy couldn't handle it, so she brought over the microphone. So, Michael, I cannot believe I get to meet you. We've been talking. You're an amazing person. You're the man who actually brought us into a completely new digital age with you and your group. So really, you had encounters with Zuckerberg and still having encounters with Zuckerberg that make what we see in the news just hysterically funny. What do you think about Zuckerberg, Michael, and his connection to Facebook and seeing that they stole it from you?
Well, it's been a long journey since we sued Facebook in 2008. First of all, it's great to be with you guys. And welcome to Columbus, by the way. It's been a long journey related to our fight or battle against the patent infringement that we discovered with Facebook. And of course, Zuckerberg plays a big part of that story. And over the years, as we have dug behind the lawsuit and the judicial corruption that we encountered, we began to see that the man is nothing close to the way he has presented to the public.
Come on now, Michael. He wrote the entire source code in a week or two. He can't remember. He can't remember when he did it.
He said it in 1 to 2 weeks.
1 to 2 weeks.
1 to 2 weeks.
He can't remember, and he can't remember when he wrote it. But he had, I think you have been filling me in, he had all kinds of contracts with people paying him to write this social network thing, and then he paid somebody else to write it, and somebody else has a contract, and none of them really had it, and then they played like they had it for a while, and then all of a sudden, miraculously, everybody had it. What they were talking about, what they wanted, this ability to have a social networking thing where you could have literally millions of people all active at once instead of just a few people. So here's Zuckerberg. Why don't you believe that Zuckerberg did this? I mean, you could take a look at him. He's a very intelligent man.
Well,
also, they had a Facebook now. What's his name? Sean Parker, and he's now stepping down.
Sean Parker, who just
stepped on it. It was funny.
Yesterday.
I heard him step on his toes and put his foot in his mouth, saying that he wasn't really kind of sure who wrote the stuff that they.
Well, it's taken us many years to piece this together. It's been like a big jigsaw puzzle, and at first we didn't know what we didn't know, but now, after 10 years of that story, we've now pieced it all together, and I'm no longer a believer in coincidence, because as we started looking at what was going on with the real invention of social networking, we then hear their story and watch what they were doing along the way, and it's uncanny the parallels that we've uncovered. But basically in 2003, which was the year before Facebook went live on February 4th, 2004, we were finishing debugging of our key database modules for the actual code, and they expected us to be ready much earlier. And so when we weren't ready, we can now see that it was Zuckerberg's job to basically stall anybody at Harvard who wanted to build a Facebook. And the Facebook name was actually created by the Harvard computer group within the university. And at some point, several people were using the name Facebook. And so as the year went on, Zuckerberg was basically cutting deals and stalling anybody that was going to try to come out and come out with a Facebook before we were ready with the code, which they then used to start Facebook. So you've got Paul Siglia, who's now on the lam because the government has chased him out of the country.
You're still connected with that case? That case is still active?
Well, they contacted me about filing an affidavit in that case, which maybe we can talk about later.
And that he has a contract for 50% of Facebook.
He has a written contract, which has just recently been
as we were just talking,
verified.
If that lawsuit he wins, he gets 50% of Facebook, it would collapse because it would no longer be able to be controlled by Hillary Clinton and the Eric Schmidt program and the U.S. Digital Service and all these things were made Facebook absolutely used by the government. It was being used by the NSA, the CIA, the FBI. Who wasn't using Facebook as a Psyops experiment?
Right.
And they now admit that. Sean Parker just admitted that. They said that they want these dopamine in the brain as a response to what it is they're giving out. If you choose a like, or in your Facebook you have somebody interested in you or somebody wants to friend you or whatever, you actually think you have a life. But really all you have is a machine that's sucking up all your time, according to the man who was, president? Or was he this?
He was president, yes.
President of Facebook says they did this on purpose. Mark says he alone wrote it, but now Sean says he helped write it. Oh, isn't that nice? Now Sean takes credit for it too, but he doesn't really take credit, because I just saw a quote from him where he was so confused. It sounded like he didn't know even where Facebook came from. And I think that's the issue. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg knows a thing. Every time I've heard him speak about it, he knows nothing. He seems like he's an idiot, to be quite frank with you. On any topic that he speaks, he opens his mouth. He's simply reading a script and he puts his foot in it every time he speaks. I do not think Michael McKibben, the person who actually developed the trade secrets and wrote the source code for social networking, which made it scalable and made it so that you could have a group with 1 billion people in it all at once.
Well, do you remember the Social Network movie where they depict the night when Zuckerberg started hacking the house sites at Harvard? Well, the real story there is that was the night that one of our key programmers finished debugging a key module, the tracking module in social networking, and that happens to be the same night that Zuckerberg wrote in his online diary, "Let the hacking begin," the very same night, and then within a few months, Facebook's out on the market. Well, those were all pieces to the puzzle. Some of those we knew at the time of the lawsuit. Some we've learned since then. But the bottom line is, it is very clear now that our technology was targeted by people that were driving Zuckerberg. He was basically the front end for a plan that involved using our technology in various forms of intelligence and data gathering, and as Sean Parker just admitted yesterday, basically mind control, where they're actually wanting people to stay on the site as much as possible. Those are all things about our technology that we intentionally tried to design out of the system so that the technology would serve people, it wouldn't enslave them. And it's interesting to see how the implementation of our technology is 180 degrees from what we designed.
I think you pointed out that any of these stooges, these tech lords who are actually fronts for the military through the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is part of the Department of Defense, or through the CIA's InQtel, and coordinated through a group we'll be talking about more called Highlands Forum. But I think we can see that all that was happening to you is they were milking you as you went along with the top patent attorneys in America. The top patent attorney in America had formerly been national security advisor, and this man is so criminal. We're going to be talking a lot about him tomorrow. But they waited for you to finish it. They had milked the copyrights from you. They had milked looking at what you had developed to a certain point, and then they got them all set up. And why was it that Facebook and all those people at Harvard were all set up? Because Larry Summers, one of the most corrupt people ever in America in terms of economics, and as a banker. He was in the World Bank, he was the head of the Treasury, he was the head of the National Economic Council. He was at Harvard at the same time. Oh, coincidence of coincidence. They knew they had the biggest patent that was going to open up the internet to make it actually work on a scale that no one could ever have imagined. So what did they do? They set up Zuckerberg. They had, oh, that's right, Uri Milner, a Russian who was also a summer student, come in, and they started putting up a whole lot of money so that Facebook looked like it was worth a huge amount of money. And then when it went public and started trading on the stock market, those Russians, Milner and his other friend Usmanov, and others who all got the insider trading, knew what was about to happen. Boom, bingo, bam. They went from millionaires to billionaires overnight when they sold that stock after it went huge. And then what happens? Well, same thing for what? You can list them all. Instagram, Twitter,
LinkedIn,
Gmail, YouTube. They all use the same technology of,
right.
What do you call that? Kind of infinite scalability, which is really the biggest step that ever really happened in terms of what we say social networking, but it's also, we'd have to have another word for it, social communication, just creating this whole social dynamic. Mark wanted to do it to judge the girls' bodies. That's the reason that he set it up. And he wanted every single college student in America on his Facebook, because then he could go in, and the hacking began because he started hacking the girls' accounts. I mean, this guy is a hack of all, completely 100%. So it must be infuriating to know how simple of a basic plan there was here to rip you off, and how they made billions, and 17 years later you're still fighting, and Mark Zuckerberg doesn't even go to work. Have you ever seen Mark Zuckerberg at work? No, he runs around.
Well, it's taken us a long time to piece this story together, and I tell people now that it's been like putting a big jigsaw puzzle together, that we had a lot of pieces on the table for years. After the Facebook lawsuit, we said there's something horribly wrong here. We just didn't know what it was. And I'm a civil engineer by training, and I kind of like to know why things are the way they are. So it wasn't good enough for us to just walk away from this corruption. So we began digging into all this, and so this story really starts from our part of it probably in about 93 and goes clear to the current time. So this story spans 3 presidents. But what we have seen consistently throughout this is a group of people that are like household names today, that Congress is talking about, that the press is talking about, that have been a part of probably the greatest abuse of the U.S. Constitution in the history of our country. That's what we've discovered. And unfortunately for us, they wanted and needed our technology to pull off this scam. And that's what we've discovered. And so, we can get into a lot of different aspects of this, but the bottom line is I've got a group of hundreds of investors who 17 years ago invested in me and in my team, and we then rolled up our sleeves, took 3 years, and figured out what was wrong with digital communication and collaboration on a large scale right as the internet was hitting. And I had just rebuilt AT&T's email system in the mid-90s. So I knew the problems. We didn't know what the solution was going to be. So I put together a team of people that I would put up against anybody at Microsoft or IBM. And I basically told my guys, I said, we're not going out of this room, metaphorically, until we figure out what's wrong with collaboration on a large scale.
Wow.
Because back then, the big collaboration tools were like Lotus Notes, Microsoft Exchange, Novell GroupWise. But when those companies who were a part of this crowd that we're talking about tried to migrate those technologies to the internet, they found they weren't scaling, they were failing. And so Microsoft, Bill Gates even admits he was late to the internet game. And I had rebuilt AT&T's email system, and it was working. And I said, well, basically, if I could put the right team of people together, I think we can fix this problem. And so 2.5 years later, we had this was in December of 2000, we had the magic aha moment, and I realized we all knew it was unique. We didn't need to be told, well, this is innovative. We knew it was, because I had guys who had built major banking systems and defense systems and communication systems. And so I basically looked for the best patent attorney I could find in Washington, highly recommended, and went to see him immediately. And that was the beginning of this evil story.
Then you got a general involved. Then you got the biggest financiers involved.
Yes.
And then they ask you to Harvard, and then they say, "Oh, can you prove that this will work?" And they give you a couple projects. But at the same time, they're actually entrapping you in
Right.
what you call it, patent infringement.
Right.
But worse than that, just absolute criminal fraud.
Well, back then it wasn't patent infringement because we didn't have the patent. It was trade secrets
Exactly.
theft, and it was basically property theft.
And that's all completely legal now. You can steal whatever you want because no patent was made. But
Well,
now,
not according to the Constitution.
well, we'd hope, but now you know that the patents in America are first run through Serco, which is basically owned by foreign countries, and what do they have to do with taking Americans' patents? Then, once you get the patent, you prove it, they can call you back in and say, we are going to look at this again, and we're going to just simply take the patent from you. So they can, and have, absorbed and confiscated and stolen huge amounts of patents.
Well, first
by
of all,
Americans.
Thomas, the attorney that we hired, his name was Professor James Chandler, did not inform me of any of the things you're talking about. What he informed me about was a lot of constitutional issues with the Fifth Amendment, with the fact that patent is property, and once a property is granted, it cannot be taken away. And so I was given the high ground of the way the Constitution is supposed to work from him. I was not informed of any of this stuff related to how the defense system can steal and take anything they want and hold inventors hostage. I was not told any of that.
And you didn't know the IBM Eclipse Foundation had been given $40 million to basically be the group to steal your idea.
But we discovered IBM Eclipse only in the last 2 years.
Wow.
And so it's taken a long time to piece that part of the story together. But it was formed when Chandler thought we were ready to go. But it was about that time that we had some really serious issues of design with the database that we had to fix, because we were discovering that even Oracle couldn't scale to the volume that our system could handle. And so we spent another year and a half on those problems, and that's when the big stall occurred. But that's when they formed the IBM Eclipse Foundation, and we know this because they started publishing their meeting minutes. And so you could see these oblique references to us in their code, although they basically described our code without describing us or ever identifying us. But what we see now is there was this plan to basically declare that our invention was open source. So once they declared our invention was open source, they could distribute our invention framework to everyone, and they did. And so once they distributed the framework to everybody, IBM actually put copyright notices on that code, and which is another form of property theft. But then when we finally fixed all the problems in late 2003, they then had distributed additional versions of the code, and we can actually point to the actual day when the theft occurred.
And you have letters, documents, affidavits, court, everything. You have so much documentation, it is astounding. But let's just look at this. Here's IBM Eclipse Foundation. They got $40 million to get going, so they're ready to take this invention and really run with it. So they're sitting there, they're percolating because you didn't finish it, but they're all ready to go, so that literally when he says let the hacking begin, he means hacking of your source code is what it is. But we know that in that group there were crazy people like James Chandler, this incredibly evil, crooked lawyer, took your invention, named it, what was it, crypto.com, took it to South America, named it
they had different names that they used.
And then
Chandler,
Breyer took it to China,
Crypto.com.
Milner took it to Russia,
Right.
and Larry Summers.
They
and
carved it up and they gave it to all their buddies
now,
in all
let's
these
name
different industries.
the other people who were there. So Mark Zuckerberg got Facebook, right? Look at this dummy. We can look at, first off, we know that Brin and Page was replaced by Eric Schmidt. Why?
Right.
Because they only did one project, and that project was a military project that they were funded for by the National National Foundation gave them money. But the point is this happens all the time. So we have them. What happened to them now? How come they're not inventing? How come the guys who took Google and were able to make it what it is, what do they do now? Nothing, just like Zuckerberg. Okay, who was the person for Twitter? Or Theo? Theo was for PayPal.
Palantir Software, PayPal before that. Right.
And has he
created, and then LinkedIn.
Yeah, okay. And then he has those companies. Has he created any new patents that are so brilliant that we know that he's a genius?
Well, there have been a lot of patents filed on top of our platform.
Yeah, but those are because they absorbed other companies that were their competition because they now had infinite funding. I'm talking about, let's look at the people who got money from this. They didn't write code, okay? They were not in any way a genius who had anything to do with taking this into the realm which they became the dummy representative
I think it's useful to understand what their aim was. And their aim was to have a common platform for the internet that could be controlled by this IBM Eclipse Foundation and others, like the National Infrastructure Assurance Council and this Highlands Forum, which you've introduced me to. But basically, it was to have a common platform that would reach out to everyone on the planet, and they actually coined the term the Internet of Things. That would be the way this happened. And in order for the government to control the all this information, the government needed a backdoor key. And so in order to have this encryption backdoor key, you had to have control of the platform in order to stick in the key or require the key be included in all software, hardware, and firmware. And that's exactly what the plan was. And so all these companies that were formed, all these initiatives that occurred were all about this common intent to control everything that flows through the internet.
And you even know the name of that backdoor because they used your programming and you were able to go in and look at it. You once quoted this to me once. You know the exact name and the place where the backdoor is placed.
Right.
And also you said...
That's public information, by the way. It's hiding in plain sight at the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Do you think Mark Zuckerberg knows that? But he does know one thing. When he was told he was going to be funded for this Facebook, they said, well, you're going to have to use two things. Our backdoor key so that the NSA can get into anything that you're doing, and you also need to use you need to be able to link to the type of search engines that Google and Yahoo are connected to, which is another project out of DARPA and In-Q-Tel called Memex. So they ask, I think they even implied to you when you were really close to making this work and going to Harvard and working with them yourself, and you were working with those big dogs,
right.
And they were saying at one point, well, now you got to build in the backdoor key for us, and then you got to make sure that you use this other stuff that we need you to have. In other words, they were saying, Michael McKibben, will you and Leader Technology sell out like the rest of these dummies, these front men, these guys who really don't know anything about looking at the source code and understanding even what they were doing? See, I don't hear them say
Thomas,
anything.
No such offer ever occurred. And I think the reason is because this entire crowd knew they wanted to pitch the idea to the whole planet that this platform was open source. And in order to make it open source, declare it open source, they could never acknowledge the creator. They could never do that because then that would kill the whole notion of a copyright,
I see what
intellectual property.
You couldn't be
patents.
connected.
No, they have tried to ignore us.
It.
They have tried to ignore us to the nth degree.
Yes.
And I guess I'm just too stupid to quit or something. But the fact is, I've got a lot of shareholders who are quite ticked off that the government has had 17 years of free use of our technology without any payment at all.
Well, I have to stop and say what really got me interested in your story, Michael, is at one time I was an entrepreneur and I'm really counting on the system to protect my innovations and my great ideas. And that's what American innovators are all about. with the spirit of entrepreneurship in America is what brought us to this point with all the amazing things that we have developed. And to hear and to read your website and to see the detail of how you were ripped off by the very people who should be protecting great creators and innovators like yourself had me so upset. That's why I said, Thomas, we're going to Ohio. I want to meet this man tonight.
That's right.
Yes, because this is just not right. And sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to let people know how passionately we feel about what has happened to you, your shareholders, and to every American who has been ripped off this way.
Because had we gone with your plan, no one would be surveilled. No one would have
Right.
Psyops being used on them.
Right.
There would be no back doors. There would be no NSA. There would be no Vault 7. There would be no Snowden. There
There's
would
two
be no
key
Willie
principles.
Binney.
Two key principles behind the design of the system that we invented, and that is respect for property and respect for privacy. And as founder John Adams said, those two principles are the guiding lights of the Constitution. I have to respect you as a person and your property and your privacy. And those are the exact two things that these guys completely ripped off by the way they took our technology and flipped it 180 degrees.
Which they do to a lot of people. As a matter of fact, we were shocked when another inventor had shown us the law that says that any patent turned in can be confiscated by the United States government for national security purposes, and then that inventor can never, ever, ever work on that idea again or even speak about it without incredible fines, incarceration, and they will mess with you. That's the end of you. I have seen this happen with other people who had patents, and when they finally made the device, the very day that it was done, someone came and stole it and burnt down their laboratory. I mean, this is not uncommon. So then there's other patent laws that are so ridiculous. Now, the amazing thing to me that I
By
had
the
no
way,
idea.
I need to interrupt you. I was never confronted with what you're talking about in
That's
terms of this kind of institutionalized theft within the military-industrial complex. That never was raised in my mind. And I think the reason is because of this issue that I was talking about here, that they didn't want to, once our code was finished, they wanted to wipe us off the face of the earth as a company and with our claims. And I think that the bottom line is because IBM had claimed our technology as copyrighted material with their IBM logo. I've actually seen the source code. So this isn't speculation. They published the source code at the Eclipse Foundation.
It's just amazing. Plus, would you please tell us some of the things that James Chandler III, the laws that he passed, that you would say, wait a second, there can't be a law that says that. That basically, like the Americans, the AIA, all these different laws that he passed.
Economic Espionage Act.
This guy, he created some of the worst laws. He wrote executive orders. He wrote constitutional bills that became acts that became laws. He wrote patent laws. Anytime there was a problem with any of this stuff going forward in the same small group of Silicon Valley tech lords who then ruled the Obama administration and gave him $2 billion already for his fake presidential library, those people are simply patent thieves working in a cartel, working in like a patent mafia cartel, and James Chandler is at the front of it. Every time you name these laws and you explain them to me, it blows my mind that this is happening in America.
Right. Well, Professor Chandler came recommended to us highly. And on paper, he had a wonderful resume. You could never expect anybody with any more qualifications to be your patent attorney. He was advising President Clinton then on national security and intellectual property. He was advising Congress. He was advising the judiciary on economic espionage and federal trade secrets. And so when he said he was interested in helping us, we were flattered. I mean, we were young entrepreneurs trying to protect our technology, and we thought, how could we do better than Professor Chandler? Well, as it turns out, and some of this we've only learned recently, that was the beginning of the end in terms of our property. But what we now see is that he was very involved with this group of people, common names today, that had been at it for a long time. And to give you a couple examples, he boasted many times that he wrote and passed the Economic Espionage Act in 1996 with not a single dissenting vote in Congress. And that included the Federal Trade Secrets Act of 1996. So you'd think that's pretty impressive to get nobody to go against you. Well, hindsight says, when does that happen in Congress? What's going on there? That question was never asked. Well, we just discovered recently there was another law passed the same day, and it was called the False Statements Accountability Act. And that act had been in place since the 1930s, I believe, and it basically said what we would expect, that you can't, when you come before a court or Congress or an agency of the government, you can't lie. It's just basically don't lie. It's called the False Statements Accountability Act. And that sounds good. That's subsection A. Then I kept reading and saw subsection B. And subsection B says subsection A doesn't apply in courts, in Congress, and before agencies. And I'm thinking, what's this? They're basically saying subsection A says you can't lie. Subsection B says none of that applies.
Legal
and
lying.
so basically it legalized lying to Congress, the courts, and agencies, and it was passed by Congress.
Not just holding back information, but outright
And
lies.
we now know all about Saul Alinsky, and it's a typical name, False Statements Accountability Act. It's exactly the opposite of what it is.
Well, it sounds to me like something the Jesuits would do.
Yes. Now, with those good old Jesuits, they are definitely the most efficient at espionage and stealing things. Plus, they used to say,
but they can lie just to get to the end result of what they need.
"Oh, absolutely, absolutely." The Pope used to, when he wanted to conquer a country, he'd send in 2 Jesuits as he's amassing an army. By the time the army got to the front gates, the Jesuits would come out with the keys to the city because they had opened a school and they were training the royalty, and they controlled everything. But now you said 1996. Now you might say, "Oh, why was Chandler back in 1996 doing all that, creating all those laws around patents, lying, how you can steal stuff,
Technology.
when
Right.
in fact it wasn't until later that the Eclipse Group, the IBM Eclipse Group, but it's the 3 little letters, IBM, back in 1993, as you have taught me, what you would call tech cartel was already beginning, and Chandler was there, so he had to set up the laws that would then protect him, because IBM was ready to send some computers overseas, and they said, you can't unless the NSA gets a back door. You're not taking our technology and giving it to anybody, because remember, the military and the government own all the cables, they own all the wires, they own all the routers, they own the microchips, they own everything. So if you think for a second that the military hasn't been there the whole time, so Chandler is setting this up so the military-industrial complex can move in as literally a transnational, international, globalist group working through the Highland Forums, using American taxpayers to steal innovation, to weaponize it, to put in the base code that is the back door, and so they can control it.
On that back door, let me inject something there. This information only came out recently in one of the last releases to Judicial Watch of Hillary's private email server. And there was a document that was released that she had held, and I'd never seen it, nobody had ever heard of it. And it basically described a Carnegie Endowment for Peace conference in 1993, and I think it was June of 1993. And the subject was what it's going to take to give the FBI a backdoor key to the internet. An encryption backdoor key. And it was a 3-page list of participants that included major players in media, banking, education, military. And guess who the first speaker at this conference was? John Podesta.
That's where I was going next. I wanted you to say his name because in 1993 with IBM, there was that security group worried about infrastructure and our security, and the same criminals were there. John Podesta, Rod Rosenstein, Robert Mueller, James Chandler, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Kapos, David Kapos, the head or the counsel for IBM. Who else was there? These are the criminals who now, as you say, just recently,
Right.
we are finding the truth about what happened in 1993 with like Uranium One and Clinton's involvement. That was back to 1993. And then in 94, when Bill Clinton came to power, that was it. They had sold out America to China, to Russia, to anybody they could, basically.
Well, see, this is way before I was doing my AT&T project back then, and actually was hiring some Russian programmers to help us with that programming code. So I'm very familiar with the history of what Harvard was doing in Moscow, just as the Soviets were dying and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do with their economy. They didn't know. And I was working with a lot of mathematicians and scientists. And
That was Larry Summers.
well, I didn't know who it was,
Right.
but I heard them complaining about these 3 Harvard economists who were coming over to our country and were trying to shove this voucher system down our throats. None of the intellectuals in Moscow liked it, but they felt like they were being forced to do it by this guy from Harvard. Well, now I know Larry Summers was one of them. There were 3 guys, and he was one of them. So it's just kind of uncanny that this plan has been many years in the making.
You were the digital Forrest Gump. Every time you look at a picture, you're standing in the background, not getting the credit for what's going on. You know,
Yeah.
there's pictures of you standing with amazing Russians, amazing people, all the people that you have sat and done depositions on, all the 17 years of research. It shocks me that you are saying that in some cases, some of these things have only come to light in the last couple of years.
Right.
I think
and because the information was all hidden, it was
Yeah.
all secret, and so that's one of the ways that this group has been able to maintain their existence is everything is got the clamp of secrecy over it, and they use the CIA secrecy agreement, the NSA secrecy agreement, and I'm sure they use it to make sure that their secrets are kept, and so they just slap secrecy on whatever they want in the courts, in the agencies, and so they're not going to let it out. They don't have to.
I had no idea how the courts are so corrupt until I came across your case. It is shocking, but I wanted to really make more fun of Mark Zuckerberg. Let me just point out a couple of things with Zuckerberg. Right now, it's been found out that Uri Milner, the Russian who invaded Silicon Valley, was one of the guys who went from a millionaire to a billionaire buying stock, along with his buddy, who's crooked as he could possibly be. What's his name? Alishar Usmanov. And then you find out that, there were these Russian ads that were bought that meddled in the election, and they were bought by Russians. No, we don't know that, because the head of the global exchange at the Board of Broadcasting Governors is a group that they call the Truth Ministry. It's the Global Engagement Center. The head of that and his 3 top guys quit, and when he did, he publicly stated that he was using Facebook. He went in, he targeted whoever he wanted by profile. He then attacked them, and then he could interact and make sure that they were manipulated. He says, that's what we were doing. We did that during the election. It wasn't Russians. There was RT and Sputnik buying some ads. That's all. But no, the truth is, in 2008 and 2016, you have blown my mind to show that Eric Schmidt not only rewrote the algorithms for Google searches, but that he gave the money that literally wrote a program called the Template to Win, written by a Russian who was working for Facebook, that literally affected the elections through Psyop's manipulation of Facebook. Zuckerberg doesn't even know what these words mean.
And
okay?
proof of that came out in Hillary's emails.
Yes, he doesn't even know what this
Absolute proof.
means. He's an idiot.
Right.
It is so possible that the unraveling could bring down these monopolies through antitrust actions, literally by one lawsuit against all of them, because it comes back to the fact that they said your invention was open source and they can't prove it. Matter of fact, I think you've said they even say they lost the original.
Right. No, their
code.
notes say they lost track of who it was that gave them the original code.
Oh, isn't that a coincidence?
Yeah.
And then you hear, I love Sean Parker saying today, when Mark wrote, Mark and I, we wrote, or they told, when he couldn't even
Yeah.
get it out of his mouth. He basically showed it was a Freudian slip showing he had nothing to do with the
Well,
writing
he
of code.
used the word invent, and then he stopped himself and he said create. So he was obviously covering his track.
Invent means patent, and there was never a
Right.
patent. As you say,
There was
after
an
the fact,
invent.
some copyrights were stamped on it by IBM. But again, this corruption goes
there
back
was
to...
there was an inventor, and that inventor is me. And I had a great team of people. I had great investors, and it's been 17 years, and the government has had free use of our invention for 17 years, and as has the entire tech world, and now it's time to pay the piper.
And I want to put you in front of a camera with Mark Zuckerberg talking about the source code, talking about the invention, and then everyone would know for a fact he had little to nothing to do with it. That would be proof. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this series with you. And Michael, I personally can't thank you enough because you have educated me on these things in a way that I never thought that I could. I must say, you have to be who you
I've
are.
learned a lot more than I ever wanted to know.
Hey,
Yes.
we went to his office. We saw
He
he's
has
the
to be
real
who
deal.
He's the real deal, and anyone would know that, and that's the reason that
And you
Betsy
don't-
came up with this
listen,
idea.
You don't need to put the two of them together, Zuckerberg and Michael McKinnon. All people need to do is go out and, search for your favorite Mark Zuckerberg YouTube and watch him squirm in his chair and pull his t-shirt and talk about how he invented this code in 2 weeks. But Michael, you have the last word, and tell us, how long did it take you to do the invention?
It was 650,000 lines of code, and it took us about 165,000 man hours.